Hey, Jenna. Great to be here today with you.
Hey,
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Very exciting. So we've got a lot to cover here, but before we get into it, could you just give a quick 30-second intro on yourself and Elmax
Yep.
Group?
Hi everyone, I'm Jenna Wright, Managing Director of Digital Assets at Elmax Group. We are a cross-asset marketplace that essentially brings buyers and sellers together across a host of trading platforms in many jurisdictions, allowing you to trade a number of different assets, so FX and digital assets specifically.
So Elmax Digital has some of the most solid trading infrastructure in all of crypto, and I thought it would be fun. I want to give everyone just a flavor, kind of a what's going on in the state of institutional crypto at the moment, but maybe we can use what happened this last weekend as a jumping off point. So to give the audience a little bit more color, we had $19 billion of liquidations. What I think kicked everything off at FTX was about 1.5 billion, if that gives you a sense. So that was a full order of magnitude larger. And you can all remember maybe some of the dust that had to settle after FTX. I certainly remember. So I'm just curious, there's a lot of different directions that we could take this, but maybe from the market structure perspective, how do you think things held up? What are your takeaways from this past weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I'm less on the operational side now, but I know the team were sort of very busy helping move assets around all weekend to facilitate our clients. But we traded over $2 billion this weekend, which is a lot for a weekend. In traditional markets, you wouldn't trade anything, right? Because we're not in a 24/7 market. But what's key is, 15 times that took FTX out, and we were all crying for days and weeks and months and trying to recover. We're now in a position where that's okay, it can happen, and actually we're trading on the back of the volatility. The market structure's there. What happened in the FTX era is every single firm was doing every part of the cycle. And in terms of speed to market and being able to trade, we just all sort of accepted that was okay. But actually, when you stand back and look at it, you shouldn't really be executing and custodying and taking credit from a single firm. That wouldn't be allowed in traditional markets. So now we've all stepped back and said, okay, this can't work. We've had this period of consolidation and convergence where we've removed some of the firms that were trying to do all of these activities, and we've started to see the professionals come in, and the exchanges and the custodians and the credit piece are coming together, and the ecosystem is, the life cycle now is that firms are working together much better so that we can really start to extrapolate some value and start to trade in the correct manner as we would expect in the traditional world.
And one thing, can I get a show of hands, by the way? How many people know what perps are, if I were to? Okay, wow. All right, A+. All right, you've graduated from B to A. So I think perps featured pretty heavily into this, and there were some new upstart exchanges like Hyperliquid that had something like $9 billion of open interest wiped. And perps is something that folks on the more institutional, more traditional side of things have been actually getting pretty interested about. And I think Elmax has a new product there as well. And I'm just curious now that there was kind of this phrase that a lot of people learned for the first time over this weekend, ADL, auto deleveraging. And some people were pretty shocked that the position that they thought they had open on these exchanges got wiped for them by their exchange. And so I'm curious, how do you think this was kind of a crucible moment for perps? Do you think this is going to change people's perceptions? What do you think about how the perp market infrastructure held up versus something like, say, spot?
Yeah, so it's a strange one for us. So we've never offered perps until around 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So part of sort of how do we...
Your timing is excellent.
How do we offer a full suite of product in the digital asset world to our institutional clients? We offer spot trading and we offer CFDs for our retail broker client base. But actually what we were missing were perps. So for those of you who don't know, a perp is essentially a futures contract with no expiry that allows you to speculate on the price of Bitcoin or Ethereum without actually having to own the asset. And the leveraged element allows you to take on much larger positions than you would if you're, paying $115,000, $14,000 for a Bitcoin today. So we think it has legs. We think it's what people want to trade. We think actually the the offset of trading the spot and the perp is important. So for us, having everything under one roof is key. But we will end up with liquidations. That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But I think it continues. But I do think there will be a switch. I think top 10 exchanges last year traded just under 60 trillion in perps alone. I think when you're talking, we're in a crypto market where a 4 trillion market cap. You think about what FX trades in a day, can trade double that easily. We're in a very small market today, but we need sort of capital markets to open up. And you mentioned earlier, we're going to talk a lot about regulation over the next few days. That single catalyst for institutional adoption is regulatory alignment. And I think once that happens, you'll probably see that switch of a lot more spot and physical Bitcoin being traded. And that might just level out things a little bit so that we're not so focused heavily on perps.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of why? I'm very curious to get a sense from the institutional lens why everyone is so interested in perps all of a sudden. Because this is actually perps, quick history lesson, I guess. Perps actually didn't. They weren't invented by crypto, even though they were popularized by, I believe, BitMEX back about 10 years ago. It was a concept invented by Robert Shiller, I believe, back in the early 90s. And it just never really took off for whatever reason. And so it's kind of been the instrument of choice for many of the degens on chain who love to speculate. But it seems like in the last year or so, there's been a massive amount of institutional interest for this instrument. And I'm just curious about what
I think they haven't really been allowed to trade spot fundamentally. The market infrastructure's not been there. The regulatory, there's no certainty and clarity there on the regulatory front, which is a problem. You're not seeing banks or sort of real money being given the green light to date. And so it's like, okay, how do we stay involved? How do we participate without having to physically touch that coin? So it's really been the option for trading. So yeah, I do think that changes over time, but it's the quick win. If you're not engaged or if you're not thinking about how you transact, you're probably missing the point and you're too late. So this has allowed firms to get to understand the asset class. And I think that puts them in good stead when they do get regulatory green lights to perhaps sort of spread that risk a little bit and transition more towards spot trading.
Okay, so final question for you on this last weekend, and then we can move on to other subjects. But sometimes I would love to get your perspective on how do you think this will be viewed by both potentially regulators and also the institutional world, because there's a very positive spin on this, which is, hey, we just handled 10x the liquidations of FTX, and we're all still sitting here, and actually markets look like they're recovering pretty nicely. The flip side of that coin would be how, what happened? And it's a little bit discouraging that markets that are even as large as crypto are today can still sell off like that. So how do you think that the world is going to end up viewing this sort of event?
Well, I heard last week someone say the hype is out and the infrastructure's in. Which is a little bit crypto bro for us. We see ourselves as an institutional offering. But I just think we will see the fusion of sort of TradFi and digital assets coming together. I think we've seen that a lot. I mean, I told you earlier, I've just come back from maternity leave, and this isn't my first rodeo. I'm on child 3 now, and every time I come back, I'm like, okay, we're still talking about institutional adoption. And we started LMAX Digital in 2018, and probably sat on a panel in 2018 and said, oh yeah, the banks are coming, probably next year. But the reality is that didn't happen. I would genuinely say I've come back this time, and I'm like, wow, it's happening. We're seeing there are a small couple of things that are still pending, but we're finally on track. I think that really what was sort of holding us back were probably credit and regulatory frameworks, and actually we're dealing with both very nicely. We're seeing prime brokers come through. Hidden Road are a great example of a traditional PB that have entered the space and are doing particularly well. And I think as soon as the banks are able to sort of engage in spot, then naturally they will fulfill that role of being a PB like they are in other asset classes. We're seeing traditional custodians, like you hear that Boni are a custodian in the digital asset space. They're not going to be the only ones. We'll see a lot more of that. And then suddenly you're starting to get trust and certainty, and people are gaining a ton of confidence at that point. And then, for us, global momentum is absolutely happening in the States on the regulatory front. It's sad that the UK is sort of falling behind a little bit there, but we'll take the lead from the US. We will look for frameworks in all jurisdictions, and based on where our clients are based, we'll go and sort of adhere to those frameworks, and we'll seek the relevant regulations. So we kind of split ourselves at the moment. We're in Gibraltar, we're in Singapore, we'll be in the US with a regulatory stance as and when it appears. It's all about sort of satisfying the needs, and I think that's kind of what's pushed institutions. There's been definitely a sense of competitiveness, and if tier ones and if financial institutions don't sort of get ahead of things, they are going to fall behind. So,
I have a number of follow-up questions there, but could you talk a little bit about the UK regulatory scene? So we've seen there are a couple of very high-profile bills that are passing in the Genius, which is the stablecoin bill that just passed. Although it's going to be a number of months or maybe about a year from November until when that actually takes effect. And Clarity, which is the market structure bill, which is what are these tokens, are they securities, how do we trade these things, that is working its way through the Senate at the current moment.
I think we'll get some clarity next year from the UK. I just don't know if that's too late. Are we losing our competitive edge? How do we become a hub if we're so far behind? Like, the US will be way far ahead by the time the UK comes out with some rules, and we don't really mind what the stance is on how they regulate it. Do they adopt existing regulations? But we just need something. It's almost like different regions across the globe are being really innovative, and some countries, some jurisdictions are coming out with specific digital asset type regulations. Singapore, for example, are being more service specific, so they'll regulate you based on your activity. It doesn't really matter. We just need some framework, and then we adhere to it. And my concern with the UK, and maybe Nigel will give you a better take on that later, is are we going to miss the boat here? Because things are rapidly moving at this point. So
I'm really curious about that. When we did this conference last year, again, in my open, I remember going back and saying that it felt like the US was at risk of missing the boat at one point, because we were so, the SEC at that time was so openly hostile to the industry that it was pushing people out. Great for DAS London. We doubled attendance year over year. Not so good if you were building in the United States. It feels like now that has entirely reversed course, and there's this big sucking sound in New York where a lot of talent and capital is moving. How at risk do you think the UK is here at falling behind or losing out to that market?
Yeah, no, I really, it's really sad. Like, our global headquarters, I mean, we have a ton of our sales guys over from all around the world because, we're headquartered here. DAS is a 3-day event in the digital assets market. But the reality is, they've had a long time. It's been really slow. And I think the window is closing. And that's really unfortunate that we have to. And I mean, by the way, when we launched So Much Digital in 2018, we had to set up and get regulated in Gibraltar. That was the framework, Gibraltar or Malta. I mean, it's disappointing, really. And we went to the FCA and we said, we're regulated as a broker and an MTF today for FX. Okay, this is what we're going to do. What do you think, and how do you support us? And the message was very much, let us know how you get on. And here we are, 7 years later, and we're still lacking a framework, and we're still waiting on guidance, and it would be really good to get some news quickly, and we go, okay, applications in. We wouldn't have it any other way. We'd love to be regulated here. But you end up having to sort of step away, and I imagine many jurisdictions are in the same boat, but it feels like, people have been, global regulatory organisations are being really proactive about it, and we could miss the boat, which would just be a shame, right?
Well, we have some policymakers who are coming who are maybe change your mind and get everyone jazzed up about some of the work
I'm
that's
here
happening.
for that, by the way.
Yeah.
If that's the case, yes. Please, come speak to us.
Okay, we've only got a couple more minutes here, and I wanted to get to something that you mentioned, which is the credit complex in crypto. So that is, the credit complex got built up back in 2020 and 2021, and it was mostly the form of this kind of retail, these shops like the BlockFis and the Celsiuses of the world, these kind of lending desks, the Genesis of the world, et cetera. And it feels like we haven't really rebuilt that. It's gotten rebuilt in DeFi, and now with the advent of ETFs in the United States, it feels like the prime brokers are starting to move in a little bit more and facilitate trading, that sort of thing. But you mentioned that whole complex getting rebuilt, and I'm just curious, what is happening on the credit front for this market?
Yeah, look, it's still, there's a long way to go. And the hidden roads of the world have new backing now with much larger balance sheets. And that's what's pending fundamentally. So when the banks do come, it's explosive.
Mm-hmm.
They will naturally PB this asset class, and it's game changer. We're talking about 10, 20, 30xing really quickly. So we're keen to see it, but what we don't want to happen, the mistake of the past was that, as a venue, we shouldn't be providing credit. We shouldn't be jeopardizing our balance sheet. We shouldn't be custodying. We shouldn't be clearing. We shouldn't be doing everything. It's okay for firms to have variances, and we are a custodian in our own right, and we have set up a separate entity to perform that, because actually over 15 years we've built up quite a nice client base who have learnt to trust and work with us. And actually it's on the back of client demand that they said, actually, we would like you, we hold assets, we'd like to store them with you. And we treat that very separately. And our custodian forms part of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to work with FAR custodians to build a nice network to say to our clients who execute with us, because that is our core business, matching buyers and sellers, you choose the custodian. You choose your prime broker if you have one. If you want, we'll interact with your prime broker. We're very familiar with that in FX terms. And actually, in FX terms, we don't typically, outside of our FX broker, we don't typically hold cash, because it's a prime brokerage network, and a bank or a bank's client interact with each other, and they have their own credit agreements with each other. So we want to say to the client, you choose your custodian, you choose your PB, we'll just make it all work. We'll allow you to execute with us, and we'll give up your trade to your prime broker or your custodian. It's moving towards that market infrastructure that we're used to in TradFi. And guys, we are creatures of habit, right? We like to do what we're used to. We don't want to, as a service provider, we need to remove the barriers of entry for you. We need to make it as easy as possible. We need to give you a regulated venue to interact with. We need to give you options. We need to remove barriers. We don't want operational headaches for you. We need to give you fixed APIs that you're used to using to trade other asset classes. We just need to make it very easy for you and give you options, I think.
Yeah. We've got a closing minute here. I want
feel
you
like
to
we haven't spoken about anything we said.
I know. That's the mark of a good conversation.
Because of this weekend's activities.
I want you to leave the audience here that we're kicking this conference off. Give people like a quick 30-second view. One thing you're excited about, something that's happening in this combination of institutional and crypto. Send us off with a bang here.
I'm very excited about LMAX perpetuals, guys. So if anyone wants to trade them, come see us today. Look, regulatory alignment is key, and that will allow the market to explode. We will wait patiently, but I think next year we'll see, maybe even this year, we'll see. There's a little bit of press about banks trading, not sure, but 2026 is the year of financial institutions trading. Let us know if we can help you, but we're going to see a big change. I'm not going to sit here next year and say institutions are coming. They'll be here. We'll be having a different conversation.
I can't wait. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you very much.